Across the sands of time, history whispers secrets that refuse to be explained. Ancient civilizations vanished without warning. Monumental structures rise with precision that defies understanding, and relics appear that challenge everything we thought we knew. Experts have studied, debated, and theorized, yet answers remain elusive, shadows of the past that continue to haunt us. What hidden forces shaped these mysteries? Why do some puzzles resist every attempt at solving? Prepare to journey into the unknown, where each discovery sparks awe and deepens the questions. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into these major historic mysteries that baffle experts. The Bastille looms like a silent sentinel on the banks of the Seine, its gray stone walls casting long shadows over the water. Once a fortress, later a prison, it has housed countless souls, political prisoners, criminals, and those swept aside by the tides of royal decree. Among these, one figure stands apart, shrouded in enigma: the man in the iron mask. Unlike other prisoners, his presence was marked by an iron, or, in some accounts, velvet-masked face, concealing his identity from the world, and a life spent in shadow, from one royal cell to another. Records tell us he was first detained during the reign of Louis XIV, moved meticulously from fortress to fortress, watched closely by the king's trusted officers. He was guarded with unusual vigilance. Even the most seasoned prison keepers seemed to tread carefully in his presence. And yet, beyond these formal notes, there is a profound silence, a deliberate erasure of his past, his origins, his very name. Why would a man be imprisoned so completely, stripped of both freedom and identity, for decades? Historians have debated the possibilities for centuries. Some suggest he was a disgraced noble, a twin of the king, perhaps even the twin of Louis XIV himself, a shadow existence, hidden to prevent the throne from being contested. Others propose that he was an accomplished officer or statesman, someone whose knowledge or lineage posed a threat to the monarchy. The documents are tantalizingly vague. Letters and orders speak of this prisoner, the masked man, and the one whose face must never be seen, but never reveal the truth. The iron mask itself has its own story. Descriptions vary. Some accounts suggest heavy iron, cold and unyielding. Others, a black velvet mask that concealed only the lower part of the face. Perhaps the discrepancies hint at embellishment, or perhaps they reflect deliberate obfuscation. Every detail carefully managed to preserve the mystery. How could a single man command such extraordinary secrecy? What power or knowledge could justify a life spent in anonymity, shuttled from fortress to fortress, never allowed to speak freely, never permitted to reveal his face? Speculative theories stretch further. Could he have been involved in international intrigue, a pawn in the complex web of European politics? Some fringe hypotheses even suggest he might have had connections to other nations' royal families or secret societies, his imprisonment a safeguard for fragile alliances. Each theory draws on fragments of fact, guard rosters, royal correspondence, payment ledgers, and layers it with imaginative interpretation. Yet, none can be confirmed, leaving room for doubt, curiosity, and endless speculation. What emerges, above all, is the interplay between certainty and obscurity. The man in the iron mask existed. This much is verified. But his life before the prison, and even the precise reasons for his extraordinary confinement, elude historians. His story reminds us that history is not always a closed book. Sometimes it is a whisper echoing through stone corridors, a shadow moving behind the flicker of torchlight, leaving questions suspended in the air. Even today, as researchers pore over archival material and historians reconstruct the political labyrinth of 17th century France, the iron mask endures as a symbol of secrecy, power, and anonymity. Who was he, truly? Was he a prince, a traitor, a threat, or simply an unfortunate man caught in forces far beyond his control? The answer remains concealed, hidden beneath layers of conjecture, documentation, and legend. And so, as we trace his steps through the dungeons and corridors of history, one cannot help but wonder, what else lies hidden behind the mask, waiting silently to be discovered? As the shadow of history stretches from the dungeons of France to its remote countryside, we shift our gaze from the silent walls of the Bastille to the mist-covered forests and rolling hills of Gévaudan. Here, in the heart of the Massif Central, dense woods and rocky terrain create a landscape both beautiful and foreboding. Villagers moved cautiously along narrow paths, eyes scanning the tree line, ears straining for the slightest sound. For 3 terrifying years, these hills became the stage for a series of attacks that would ignite fear across the region and perplex investigators for generations. The killings of the Beast of Gévaudan. The first attacks, recorded in 1764, were chilling in their brutality. Women and children were reported missing, only to be found later with wounds that suggested a predator of unusual strength and ferocity. Official records describe the panic. Villagers arming themselves, hunting parties formed, even royal intervention from Louis XV, who sent his finest marksmen and soldiers to track the creature. Yet, despite these efforts, the beast eluded capture, leaving behind only blood-stained fields, torn clothing, and unanswered questions. Historical accounts paint a vivid, almost surreal picture. Descriptions vary. Some spoke of a wolf, others a monstrous hybrid, large enough to bring down a fully grown man. Witnesses claimed the creature moved with extraordinary speed and intelligence, attacking methodically rather than randomly. Even the experienced hunters who pursued it marveled at its cunning. How could a single animal, or perhaps something else entirely, terrorize an entire province, seemingly untouchable? Mainstream historians generally consider it a wolf or a pack of wolves, unusually aggressive and unusually large. Yet, the intensity and selectiveness of the attacks fuel speculation. Could there have been a creature unknown to natural science? Was there a human hand guiding the killings? Perhaps a madman exploiting superstition and fear? Royal commissions received letters from frightened villagers describing sightings that bordered on the fantastical. A beast with eyes that gleamed like fire in the night, a howl that chilled even seasoned hunters, footprints larger than any known wolf. Some fringe theories suggest an escaped exotic animal, perhaps brought from distant lands during France's colonial ventures, or a trained predator used in secret experiments by individuals seeking revenge or notoriety. Others propose that the killings were exaggerated or manipulated, that the panic itself became a tool for those seeking control over isolated villages. And yet, even amidst skepticism, the sheer number of documented attacks, over 100 victims in just 3 years, cannot be easily dismissed. The terrain of Gévaudan itself adds to the enigma. Narrow valleys, dense forests, and jagged cliffs would have allowed an animal, or a cunning perpetrator, to strike unpredictably and vanish without a trace. Each witness account, each official report, paints a portrait of terror mixed with awe. Was the beast a creature of nature, a cunning predator beyond ordinary understanding, or a manifestation of human fear projected onto the wild? Even today, centuries later, the Beast of Gévaudan retains its power to unsettle and intrigue. Scholars continue to pore over records, comparing reports, analyzing sketches, and examining historical context. And as we consider the lives lost, the fear that gripped entire communities, and the unanswered questions that remain, one is left to wonder. What truly stalked those hills, and could we ever hope to know the full story? In the quiet of the forest, among the fog and the whispers of history, the mystery lingers, its truth concealed, waiting for those willing to look beyond the known, to question what lurks in the shadows, and to confront a terror that has haunted human imagination for more than 2 centuries. As the shadows of history shift from the forests of Gévaudan to the windswept shores of the Outer Banks, we arrive at a place of mystery that has long defied explanation: Roanoke Island. Stretching along the jagged coastline of what is now North Carolina, the island is battered by relentless Atlantic winds, its marshes and inlets weaving a labyrinth of hidden channels. In 1587, settlers arrived here from England, a group of men, women, and children seeking a new beginning, a foothold in the New World. But when relief ships returned 3 years later, they found the settlement abandoned. Homes stood empty, supplies untouched, and the only clue left behind, the word Croatoan carved into a post. The disappearance of the Roanoke colonists remains one of the earliest and most perplexing mysteries in American history. Contemporary accounts describe a community that had begun to establish itself, fields planted, dwellings constructed, and daily life taking root. Governor John White, who had returned to England for supplies, documented the colony's progress with care, only to return and find silence where there had been promise. What happened to over 100 men, women, and children in those 3 years? Historical investigations suggest several possibilities. Some scholars posit that the colonists were absorbed by local Native American tribes, integrating into communities such as the Croatoan. Others theorize that they perished due to starvation, disease, or attacks from rival groups. Evidence is sparse. Scattered artifacts, anecdotal reports, and tantalizingly vague references in letters and journals leave much to interpretation. Yet no definitive trace of the colony has ever been found. More speculative explanations deepen the mystery. Could the settlers have attempted to move inland, only to vanish into the dense forests and swamps, leaving no markers of their existence? Were there internal conflicts or leadership struggles that prompted a sudden exodus? Some fringe theories even suggest more extraordinary possibilities: a secret relocation orchestrated to protect the colonists from political intrigue in England, or an undocumented journey into distant territories, never to be seen again. Each theory relies on fragments of fact and conjecture, creating a mosaic of uncertainty. The geography of Roanoke Island itself complicates the story. Its waterways, shifting sands, and treacherous marshes would have made travel and survival extraordinarily difficult, particularly without strong alliances or resources. Yet, the idea that an entire community could disappear without a trace challenges our understanding of both human endurance and the historical record. How could so many lives be erased so completely, leaving behind only whispers of what might have been? Archaeologists continue to search the region, examining soil layers, artifacts, and historical sites for clues. Some discoveries hint at interaction between the colonists and local tribes. Other findings remain inconclusive, tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly opaque. The disappearance of Roanoke raises broader questions about early colonial ventures, cultural encounters, and the fragility of human settlements in uncharted lands. As we consider the empty homes, the abandoned fields, and the enigmatic inscription carved into wood, we are reminded that history does not always yield its secrets. The lost colony of Roanoke endures as a testament to human resilience, hope, and the limits of our knowledge. Were the settlers absorbed into the land, the people, or both? Or did some other fate befall them, leaving no trace but a single word carved in memory? In the quiet stillness of the Outer Banks, the question remains, unresolved, inviting us to ponder what might still lie hidden, waiting for discovery. From the quiet shores of Roanoke, where hope and despair once intertwined, we turn now to the icy expanse of the Arctic, where the seas themselves seem to hold secrets older than memory. It was in these desolate waters, amidst fog and drifting icebergs, that sailors of the early 19th century reported a sight both chilling and inexplicable. A ship, abandoned yet intact, sailing silently without a crew. This was the Octavius, a vessel said to have embarked from England bound for Greenland, only to reappear years later near the coast of Greenland, carrying a mystery that has haunted maritime lore ever since. The story begins with the ship's intended voyage, a typical trading expedition, its hold filled with goods, its decks brimming with supplies. But according to accounts recorded by those who claimed to encounter the Octavius decades later, the crew had vanished, their belongings untouched, the ship eerily preserved in the frozen waters. Some reports suggest it had been frozen in the ice for years, yet remained afloat, as though guided by an unseen hand. What calamity could have overtaken the entire crew, leaving no explanation? Historical records confirm that whalers and traders in the Arctic during the late 18th and early 19th centuries often encountered ships crushed by ice or abandoned after severe storms. Yet the Octavius, in contrast, appeared to have been abandoned deliberately, or perhaps by forces we cannot fully understand. According to some accounts, the captain and crew had died while attempting to navigate the treacherous polar waters, trapped in ice long before the ship drifted south. Others claim that the vessel had remained at sea for decades, frozen in time, a floating testament to human endurance and nature's unforgiving power. Eyewitness descriptions add to the enigma. Sailors reported seeing the ship's rigging intact, sails tattered but functional, and the decks free of life. Some accounts even suggest that journals or logs were discovered aboard, chronicling the slow decay of the crew, their final entries filled with notes of fear, hope, and resignation. Could such documents truly survive years of Arctic storms and freezing temperatures? Or were these details shaped by imagination, transmitted orally, and embroidered over time? Speculation about the Octavius has given rise to numerous theories. Some suggest that the ship was trapped in shifting ice, its crew succumbing to exposure or scurvy, leaving the vessel to drift across the North Atlantic, invisible to other sailors, until it appeared centuries later. Others propose more fantastical explanations, that the ship became caught in a supernatural phenomenon, or that it entered currents and weather patterns unknown to mariners of the time, preserving it in a liminal space between life and death. While such ideas cannot be verified, they reflect the profound sense of mystery that continues to surround the Octavius. What makes the story endure is not merely the disappearance of its crew, but the larger question it poses about human vulnerability and the unpredictability of the natural world. How can an entire crew vanish without trace, leaving behind only the silent skeleton of a ship? And what does it reveal about the limits of our understanding, both of the sea and of history itself? Even today, as researchers examine logs, shipping records, and Arctic navigation patterns, the Octavius refuses to surrender its secrets. Its story drifts like the ship itself, caught between fact and folklore, inviting us to ponder not only what happened to those lost at sea, but also the countless mysteries that the oceans still conceal. In the frozen quiet of the polar waters, the ghost ship remains, a silent witness to time, and an enduring enigma that continues to haunt the imagination. From the icy silence of the Arctic seas, where the Octavius drifted like a frozen enigma, we now turn to the salons and courts of 18th century Europe, where a different kind of mystery thrived, not one of nature's cold embrace, but of a man whose very existence seemed to defy the passage of time. He was known simply as the Count of Saint-Germain, a figure shrouded in elegance, secrecy, and rumor, appearing at royal courts from France to Portugal, his reputation preceding him like a shadow that refused to fade. Historical records describe him as a polymath, fluent in multiple languages, skilled in music and painting, knowledgeable in chemistry and alchemy. His movements were always precise, his appearance immaculate, and yet, curiously, his origins remained unknown. Birth certificates, family records, and early life accounts are all conspicuously absent, leaving scholars to speculate. Where did he come from, and how did he acquire such extraordinary knowledge and wealth without leaving a trace of his past? Accounts from contemporaries describe his interactions at courts with fascination and unease. The Count was said to possess a remarkable charm, a charisma that drew monarchs, nobles, and intellectuals alike. He spoke with authority on matters of science and philosophy, yet also wove tales of mystical arts and esoteric wisdom. Some suggested he had discovered the secret to eternal life, for he appeared unchanged over decades, a man whose age seemed to resist definition. Could this be mere exaggeration, the product of rumor and admiration, or something far stranger? Mainstream historians generally consider the Count a brilliant, enigmatic adventurer, an accomplished diplomat and social chameleon whose life was carefully curated to conceal humble or unknown origins. Yet the more extraordinary reports persist. Saint Germain allegedly appeared at the same social events decades apart, seemingly unaging, with contemporaries noting that he spoke of events centuries earlier as if he had witnessed them firsthand. Letters attributed to him reference knowledge of future inventions and political movements long before they occurred. How could such insights have been possible without the benefit of modern communication or historical records? Speculative theories stretch further into the mysterious. Some suggest he was a spy, working on behalf of multiple European powers, using his brilliance to manipulate politics and wealth behind the scenes. Others claim he possessed secret knowledge of alchemy, perhaps even the fabled philosopher's stone, allowing him to extend his life and influence far beyond ordinary human limits. A more mystical interpretation posits that he was not constrained by normal mortality, a figure who traversed time as easily as space, leaving only whispers and legends in his wake. The environments he frequented, the opulent halls of Versailles, the candlelit chambers of Lisbon, the salons of London, add to the enigma. In each place, he left an impression of brilliance, wealth, and sophistication, yet never concrete evidence of his past or future. How does one reconcile the tangible traces he left, manuscripts, compositions, chemical formulas, with the absence of any verifiable biography? And if he did indeed master secrets unknown to his contemporaries, why did he not leave a more definitive legacy for posterity? Even today, historians and occult enthusiasts alike continue to debate the Count's identity and purpose. Was he simply a man of extraordinary talent and charm, or did he possess knowledge and abilities beyond human understanding? As we trace the quiet echoes of his life through letters, memoirs, and court records, one is left to ponder the ultimate mystery. Can a person truly transcend time, leaving only curiosity, speculation, and the faintest fingerprints on history? In the hushed corridors of Europe's grandest palaces, amid fading portraits and delicate manuscripts, the Count of Saint-Germain endures as a figure who refuses to be fully known. And in that refusal lies the power of his story, a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only contemplated, inviting us to wonder what secrets may still linger, hidden in plain sight. From the opulent courts of Europe, where the Count of Saint-Germain moved like a shadow of mystery, our journey now carries us back to the frozen, uncharted reaches of the Arctic, a landscape as unforgiving as it is beautiful. Here, the story of the Franklin expedition unfolds, a tale of ambition, endurance, and a disappearance that has haunted explorers and historians for nearly 2 centuries. The ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, once brimming with supplies and human determination, set sail from England in 1845, bound for the Northwest Passage. Their mission, to chart the last unknown maritime routes connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. As the vessels sailed north, they entered waters of stark beauty, where icebergs loomed like cathedral spires and the wind carried a biting, relentless chill. For months, the crews navigated treacherous channels, keeping careful logs and charts. Then, inexplicably, they vanished. Letters and messages intended for future retrieval were never delivered, leaving only cryptic clues scattered across the ice and subsequent accounts from Inuit witnesses. What could have caused an expedition so carefully prepared, with seasoned sailors and modern provisions, to disappear without a trace? The evidence that has emerged over the years is both chilling and fragmentary. Skeletons and personal effects, discovered decades later, tell a story of endurance pushed to the extreme, men succumbing to starvation, exposure, or scurvy. Some remains exhibit signs of trauma, cuts and fractures, that suggest desperate measures, possibly cannibalism, though the context remains uncertain. Journals recovered from the ship's abandoned camps hint at illness, low morale, and the slow encroachment of ice trapping the vessels where they could neither advance nor retreat. Yet, despite these clues, the full sequence of events remains obscured by the Arctic's vast, frozen silence. Mainstream historians largely agree that environmental hazards, combined with limited medical knowledge and the unpredictable behavior of sea ice, contributed to the expedition's demise. However, the more puzzling details resist simple explanation. Why were some crew members found hundreds of miles from the ships, apparently wandering alone across the ice? How did the vessels themselves, intact and well-built, come to be abandoned in places where survival would have seemed impossible? And perhaps most hauntingly, how could a large group of experienced seamen vanish in a region already familiar to whalers and local Inuit populations? Speculative theories add further layers of intrigue. Some propose that the expedition may have encountered sudden, catastrophic environmental shifts, storms, ice surges, or magnetic anomalies that disoriented navigation and led to chaotic dispersal. Others suggest the possibility of undetected disease or poisoning, even from poorly preserved provisions, as a force that decimated the crew rapidly. A few fringe accounts speculate about encounters with unknown natural phenomena, or the interference of forces beyond ordinary comprehension, though such ideas remain unverified. Each theory wrestles with the tension between human skill and the Arctic's brutal unpredictability. The geography itself, the vast, unbroken stretches of ice, hidden channels, and seasonal extremes, amplifies the mystery. Every discovery, whether a fragment of a ship's hull or a personal artifact, opens new questions rather than providing closure. How did these men, trained and disciplined, succumb so completely to an environment they were ostensibly prepared to navigate? What decisions were made in the fog, the cold, and the white silence that stretched endlessly around them? Even today, modern technology, submersibles, sonar mapping, and ice-penetrating radar has revealed parts of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, yet the full story remains tantalizingly incomplete. As we consider the men who vanished into the Arctic expanse, leaving behind only echoes of ambition and endurance, we are confronted with the profound fragility of human endeavor in the face of nature's vast, indifferent power. The Franklin expedition persists not only as a historical mystery, but as a question that challenges our understanding of exploration, survival, and the limits of human knowledge. What truly happened on those frozen waters, and what secrets might the Arctic still conceal beneath its silent ice? From the frozen expanse of the Arctic, where the Franklin expedition vanished into history's silence, we now turn to a more confined yet equally enigmatic setting, the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Here, a man who once commanded Europe's armies spent his final years in isolation, far from the grandeur of Paris and the battlefields that had shaped his legend. Napoleon Bonaparte, exiled in 1815 after his defeat at Waterloo, lived under constant watch, his movements constrained by the British garrison, yet his life remained a puzzle, marked by mystery, intrigue, and questions that endure to this day. St. Helena is a landscape of stark contrasts: rugged cliffs rising from the ocean, winds that sweep across barren plateaus, and hidden valleys shrouded in mist. It is in this desolate beauty that Napoleon's health and mind slowly deteriorated, or perhaps in ways that remain uncertain. Contemporary accounts record his days with meticulous detail: long walks around the garden of Longwood House, moments of reflection, the study of history and philosophy, and correspondence with those who remained loyal. Yet beyond the documented routines lies a deeper enigma. How did the once indomitable leader, whose life had shaped the destinies of millions, meet the end that would spark speculation for centuries? Historical records confirm that Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, officially from stomach cancer, though even this has been debated. Eyewitnesses described his suffering, noting a gradual decline marked by weight loss, abdominal pain, and a pallor that contrasted sharply with his former vigor. Medical notes from attending physicians provide evidence consistent with malignancy, yet anomalies persist, symptoms and progression that some argue were inconsistent with the disease, or perhaps influenced by environmental and psychological factors. Mainstream historians generally accept cancer as the cause, citing family history and post-mortem examinations. Yet others have proposed alternative explanations, suggesting chronic arsenic poisoning, whether intentional or accidental, may have contributed to his decline. Hair analysis conducted in modern studies revealed traces of arsenic, though in amounts that remain difficult to interpret. Could it have been deliberate foul play, a covert assassination orchestrated by lingering enemies, or the result of environmental exposure from wallpapers and medicines common at the time? Speculation stretches further into more unusual realms. Some researchers propose that the prolonged isolation, stress, and psychological torment of exile accelerated his physical decline. Others consider the influence of mysterious medications, experimental treatments, and even the possibility that he was the subject of early attempts at chemical intervention by physicians experimenting in the era's limited medical knowledge. Each hypothesis, grounded partially in evidence and partially in conjecture, reflects the enduring fascination with a figure who never seemed to fully yield to time or circumstance. St. Helena itself compounds the mystery. Its remoteness, limited contact with the outside world, and strict surveillance meant that few could verify events, allowing rumors and theories to flourish. Letters, memoirs, and anecdotal accounts describe his final interactions with attendants and visitors, painting a portrait of a man both resigned and defiant, aware of his legacy, and yet at the mercy of forces beyond his control. How much of what we know is filtered through bias, fear, or embellishment? And how much of his final experience remains obscured by the fog of isolation and secrecy? Even today, historians, biographers, and forensic experts continue to debate Napoleon's final days, combing through documentation, examining contemporary accounts, and reanalyzing physical evidence. His death, while recorded, is not entirely explained. Layers of speculation and unanswered questions remain. As we walk the lonely paths of Longwood House, imagining the echoes of the fallen emperor, we are left to wonder, did he truly succumb to natural illness, or did the convergence of isolation, stress, and human intervention conceal a more complex fate? In the quiet of St. Helena, the mystery endures, inviting us to reflect on the fragility of power, the limits of historical certainty, and the secrets that time alone cannot fully reveal. From the frozen expanse of the Arctic, where the Franklin expedition vanished into history's silence, we now turn to a more confined yet equally enigmatic setting, the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Here, a man who once commanded Europe's armies spent his final years in isolation, far from the grandeur of Paris and the battlefields that had shaped his legend. Napoleon Bonaparte, exiled in 1815 after his defeat at Waterloo, lived under constant watch, his movements constrained by the British garrison, yet his life remained a puzzle, marked by mystery, intrigue, and questions that endure to this day. St. Helena is a landscape of stark contrasts: rugged cliffs rising from the ocean, winds that sweep across barren plateaus, and hidden valleys shrouded in mist. It is in this desolate beauty that Napoleon's health and mind slowly deteriorated, or perhaps in ways that remain uncertain. Contemporary accounts record his days with meticulous detail: long walks around the garden of Longwood House, moments of reflection, the study of history and philosophy, and correspondence with those who remained loyal. Yet beyond the documented routines lies a deeper enigma. How did the once indomitable leader, whose life had shaped the destinies of millions, meet the end that would spark speculation for centuries? Historical records confirm that Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, officially from stomach cancer, though even this has been debated. Eyewitnesses described his suffering, noting a gradual decline marked by weight loss, abdominal pain, and a pallor that contrasted sharply with his former vigor. Medical notes from attending physicians provide evidence consistent with malignancy, yet anomalies persist, symptoms and progression that some argue were inconsistent with the disease, or perhaps influenced by environmental and psychological factors. Mainstream historians generally accept cancer as the cause, citing family history and post-mortem examinations. Yet others have proposed alternative explanations, suggesting chronic arsenic poisoning, whether intentional or accidental, may have contributed to his decline. Hair analysis conducted in modern studies revealed traces of arsenic, though in amounts that remain difficult to interpret. Could it have been deliberate foul play, a covert assassination orchestrated by lingering enemies, or the result of environmental exposure from wallpapers and medicines common at the time? Speculation stretches further into more unusual realms. Some researchers propose that the prolonged isolation, stress, and psychological torment of exile accelerated his physical decline. Others consider the influence of mysterious medications, experimental treatments, and even the possibility that he was the subject of early attempts at chemical intervention by physicians experimenting in the era's limited medical knowledge. Each hypothesis, grounded partially in evidence and partially in conjecture, reflects the enduring fascination with a figure who never seemed to fully yield to time or circumstance. St. Helena itself compounds the mystery. Its remoteness, limited contact with the outside world, and strict surveillance meant that few could verify events, allowing rumors and theories to flourish. Letters, memoirs, and anecdotal accounts describe his final interactions with attendants and visitors, painting a portrait of a man both resigned and defiant, aware of his legacy, and yet at the mercy of forces beyond his control. How much of what we know is filtered through bias, fear, or embellishment? And how much of his final experience remains obscured by the fog of isolation and secrecy? Even today, historians, biographers, and forensic experts continue to debate Napoleon's final days, combing through documentation, examining contemporary accounts, and reanalyzing physical evidence. His death, while recorded, is not entirely explained. Layers of speculation and unanswered questions remain. As we walk the lonely paths of Longwood House, imagining the echoes of the fallen emperor, we are left to wonder, did he truly succumb to natural illness, or did the convergence of isolation, stress, and human intervention conceal a more complex fate? In the quiet of St. Helena, the mystery endures, inviting us to reflect on the fragility of power, the limits of historical certainty, and the secrets that time alone cannot fully reveal. From the shadowed streets of Salem, where fear and suspicion once consumed an entire community, we now shift to the grand salons and concert halls of 18th century Vienna, where another kind of mystery unfolded, one not born of mass hysteria, but of genius cut tragically short. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a prodigy whose compositions reshaped music itself, left the world at the age of just 35, his death shrouded in speculation, rumor, and unanswered questions. The streets of Vienna in 1791 were alive with commerce and culture, yet beneath the city's elegant facades, whispers circulated about the circumstances surrounding the composer's final days. Accounts from the time describe Mozart's sudden illness, fever, swelling, and extreme fatigue, symptoms that rapidly worsened despite the care of physicians. Letters from friends and family capture a sense of unease and concern, noting his inability to work at full strength, even as commissions and performances pressed upon him. Official records state that he died on December 5, 1791, but what caused his untimely demise has been debated ever since. Was it a natural illness, a lingering infection, or something more enigmatic? A convergence of forces that history cannot fully explain. Medical historians have suggested several plausible causes, from streptococcal infection leading to kidney failure to rheumatic fever, yet the evidence is incomplete. The descriptions in contemporary accounts do not fully align with any single disease, leaving room for continued speculation. Even the notion of poisoning, long propagated by rumor, has been revisited in modern times. Some historians argue that Mozart's death may have been hastened by the treatments of the era, bloodletting, purgatives, and other remedies considered standard medical practice, which, while well-intentioned, may have weakened him further. Yet alongside these mainstream explanations, more mysterious elements persist. Mozart himself spoke of feeling unusually fatigued and melancholic in his final months, sometimes expressing a sense of foreboding about his own mortality. Some letters hint at anxiety regarding rivals, unfinished works, and the pressures of patronage, a subtle reminder of how the burdens of genius intersected with the precariousness of life in late 18th century Vienna. Could emotional and physical stress have compounded a natural illness, creating a perfect storm that history struggles to decipher? Speculative theories abound. Some have suggested foul play, citing alleged jealousies among contemporaries or financial disputes, though evidence is tenuous. Others delve into the spiritual or mystical, inspired by Mozart's deeply religious and symbolic compositions, wondering whether the composer himself felt a premonition of his end. Even in the realm of art, his unfinished Requiem remains a haunting testament to mortality, a musical fragment that echoes questions about life, death, and legacy. Vienna itself, the bustling markets, narrow alleyways, and candlelit salons, provides a backdrop that magnifies the mystery. In such a city, with its complex interplay of culture, politics, and intrigue, the lines between fact and rumor often blurred. What is known with certainty is that Mozart's death was sudden and tragic, leaving behind masterpieces completed, in progress, or imagined, and a trail of unanswered questions. Even today, as scholars examine surviving documents, letters, and medical records, Mozart's final days resist full explanation. His death, like his music, continues to evoke wonder, melancholy, and speculation. What precisely ended the life of a man whose compositions seem almost eternal? Was it illness, misfortune, human error, or something more elusive? In the echo of his symphonies, the mystery endures, inviting us to consider not only the fragility of life, but the timelessness of genius and the secrets that history may never fully reveal. From the fog-shrouded streets of Salem, where fear and superstition consumed an entire community, we now step into the elegant yet enigmatic world of 18th century Vienna, a city alive with music, artistry, and secrets. Here, in the ornate chambers of patronage and crowded concert halls, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a composer of unparalleled genius, created works that continue to resonate across centuries. Yet, amid this brilliance, a shadow loomed. In December of 1791, Mozart's life ended abruptly and mysteriously, leaving a trail of questions that history has yet to fully answer. Vienna in the late 18th century was a city of contrasts. Gilded salons and grand theaters sat alongside narrow cobbled streets and dimly lit apartments. Mozart's final home, modest yet bustling with the energy of composition, became the setting for the final chapter of a life both celebrated and enigmatic. Contemporary accounts describe him growing increasingly fatigued, often confined to his bed, his body beset by swelling, fever, and pain. Friends and family watched helplessly as the vibrant energy that had once fueled symphonies and operas waned, leaving a man whose intellect remained sharp but whose body betrayed him. The official records state that Mozart died on December 5, 1791, at the age of 35, with acute illness, commonly cited as a severe form of rheumatic fever, listed as the cause. Yet even with modern analysis, his death refuses to be neatly explained. Some physicians and historians suggest kidney failure, streptococcal infection, or complications from a fever might have led to his demise. Still, inconsistencies in symptoms, progression, and eyewitness accounts fuel enduring uncertainty. How could a man so robust, so accustomed to the physical demands of composing, performing, and traveling, succumb so suddenly and mysteriously? Rumors of foul play began almost immediately. Some speculated that a rival, jealous of Mozart's genius, had poisoned him. Others pointed to financial disputes or the complexities of courtly politics as motives. These theories, while lacking conclusive evidence, persisted in letters, diaries, and whispered accounts. In the centuries that followed, scholars revisited the question, exploring chemical analyses of hair samples that revealed traces of arsenic. Was this evidence of intentional poisoning, environmental exposure from wallpapers, or simply a natural accumulation from medicines of the time? Each hypothesis raises new questions without ever providing certainty. Even more mysterious are the subtle details of Mozart's final months. He spoke often of completing a requiem commissioned anonymously, an unfinished work that would become entwined with his own mortality. Letters convey both a sense of urgency and premonition, an awareness of his limited time, yet no explicit indication of his impending death. Could psychological strain, compounded by physical illness, have played a role in hastening his decline? Did the pressures of fame and patronage create a silent, invisible force that weighed upon him as heavily as any physical ailment? Vienna itself, the salons, theaters, and cobbled streets, remains a witness to his final days, each location imbued with echoes of music and whispers of speculation. His death invites reflection not only on the fragility of life, but also on the mysteries that can surround even the most documented existence. In the silence of his modest apartment, the final chords of Mozart's life fade, yet leave a haunting resonance. How could such a luminous figure depart the world so suddenly, leaving questions that endure to this day? As we consider the composer's legacy, the symphonies, operas, and chamber works that defy time, we are left with a question as haunting as any melody he ever wrote. What truly ended the life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and what secrets of his final days may remain forever hidden within the delicate balance of history, rumor, and human curiosity? From the quiet streets of Vienna, where the genius of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart faded into mystery, we now journey westward over the rolling expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, where sailors of centuries past claimed to glimpse a land that existed more in legend than in maps. Hy-Brasil, the so-called Phantom Island, appears and disappears in accounts spanning hundreds of years, a spectral presence that has both fascinated and baffled explorers, cartographers, and historians alike. In a sea of ever-shifting currents, Hy-Brasil hovers just beyond the line of certainty, a place described in whispers, logs, and the margins of nautical charts. Early maps, some dating as far back as the 14th century, mark an island west of Ireland, shrouded in a permanent mist and labeled with names that evoke mystery and enchantment. Sailors told of glimpsing it fleetingly on clear days, only to watch it vanish into the horizon, as if the Atlantic itself conspired to keep its location hidden. From small fishing boats to daring voyages funded by princes, countless attempts were made to chart or land on Hy-Brasil, and yet no confirmed settlement or solid evidence was ever recorded. What did these mariners truly see? And why did a location so tangible in their reports refuse to anchor itself in reality? Descriptions of the island are often consistent. A lush, green land with rivers, hills, and valleys, sometimes appearing with a faintly geometric shape. Some claimed that inhabitants, wise and reclusive, lived there in isolation, a people who avoided contact with the outside world. Legends speak of hidden knowledge, treasure, or magical properties associated with Hy-Brasil, tales that persisted long after sailors' logs were catalogued and maps were drawn. Could these consistent descriptions point to a real location obscured by fog, tidal anomalies, or optical illusions? Or are they the product of collective imagination, carried across generations of seafarers? Historical records add layers of intrigue. In 1480, the island appeared on a Catalan atlas, meticulously charted yet unverifiable. Expeditions in the 17th century, including those funded by English merchants and Irish explorers, failed to find solid ground, though some reported seeing distant hills or coastlines that disappeared as they approached. Could shifting sands, fog banks, and ocean currents have created illusions that deceived even the most seasoned navigators? Or might Hy-Brasil have been a real island, later submerged by tectonic activity or rising sea levels, leaving only the memory of its fleeting presence? Speculation ranges from the scientific to the fantastical. Some modern geographers suggest that Hy-Brasil may have been a misidentified part of a real island, or an optical mirage caused by atmospheric refraction, a phenomenon known as a fata morgana. Others wonder whether ancient mariners, lacking precise instruments, recorded exaggerated sightings or conflated distant landforms into a singular mystical island. Less conventional theories propose the possibility of lost civilizations or even entrances to subterranean worlds hidden under the ocean, though such ideas remain firmly in the realm of legend rather than evidence. The enduring fascination with Hy-Brasil lies not only in its elusiveness, but in what it represents. The tension between observation and reality, between the world as it appears and the world as it is. The Atlantic, vast and unknowable, has swallowed countless ships, memories, and stories, leaving us to ponder whether some things are meant to remain just beyond reach. Maps may have been redrawn, explorers may have sailed new routes, yet the island's shadow lingers on the edges of history, a testament to humanity's desire to find the unknown and to chart what refuses to be measured. Even today, historians, cartographers, and folklorists continue to study the references to Hy-Brasil, piecing together accounts from ship logs, literary mentions, and surviving maps. Each new discovery adds nuance, but rarely answers the fundamental question: did the island exist, or is it purely the creation of imagination and maritime folklore? And if it did exist, what fate befell it, leaving only traces in the sea spray and the records of those who dared to chase it? As we imagine standing on the deck of a ship in the North Atlantic, the horizon shimmering under sunlight and mist, Hy-Brasil's form flickers in and out of view. The mystery endures, whispering across the waves, inviting us to wonder what lies beyond the edges of certainty. In the endless rhythm of ocean and sky, some things remain hidden, reminding us that history, like the sea itself, holds secrets that may never be fully revealed. From the shifting horizons of the Atlantic, where Hy-Brasil flickered in and out of sailors' visions, we return to solid ground, to the streets and shadows of early 17th century England, a world of intrigue, tension, and religious turmoil. Here, in the heart of London, the Gunpowder Plot of 1605 emerged as one of history's most infamous conspiracies, a story woven from politics, faith, and secrecy. Yet, as we examine the details, questions remain. Was it a straightforward plan by desperate men, or does the story conceal layers of deception, manipulation, and unanswered mysteries? The setting is unmistakable. Beneath the Gothic spires of Westminster, the stone halls of the Palace of Westminster held the king, his parliament, and the fragile balance of power in a nation divided by religion. England, still reeling from the Reformation, was rife with tension between Protestant rulers and the Catholic minority, who faced persecution and suspicion. Into this atmosphere stepped a small group of men led by Robert Catesby, plotting to detonate explosives beneath the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament, intending to assassinate King James I and ignite a Catholic uprising. Historical records describe the conspirators' careful preparation: barrels of gunpowder stored in a rented cellar beneath Parliament, meticulous scheming, and coded correspondence. Yet even as the plot progressed, accounts of its discovery in November 1605 are tangled with intrigue. Guy Fawkes, the man often remembered as the face of the conspiracy, was apprehended in the early hours, torch in hand, just before the planned explosion. Interrogations, confessions, and subsequent trials produced detailed narratives, but the completeness and reliability of these records have long been questioned. Were all conspirators captured, or did some escape and fade into the shadows of history? Official explanations frame the plot as a desperate act by a small, radical group of Catholics. Yet some historians and researchers note anomalies that invite speculation. Certain letters appear inconsistently in the archives. Testimonies may have been extracted under duress, and political motives for exaggerating the conspiracy cannot be dismissed. Could the plot have been manipulated by agents within the government to justify harsher crackdowns on Catholics? Were some conspirators double agents, working to ensure the plan's failure, or perhaps even to serve political ends not visible in the historical record? Beyond these possibilities, other elements add to the mystery. The rapidity of Fawkes's capture, the timing of the Monteagle letter warning Parliament of danger, and the precision of the authorities' response raise questions about how much of the plot was known beforehand. Were there individuals in positions of power orchestrating events behind the scenes, guiding the outcome to suit broader objectives? The answers remain elusive, lost in the fog of history and political maneuvering. The cultural resonance of the Gunpowder Plot also magnifies its enigmatic nature. Guy Fawkes masks, annual ceremonies, and collective memory preserve the event in public consciousness, yet these symbolic reminders can obscure as much as they reveal. They transform historical actors into archetypes and heroes into villains, allowing the story to persist in legend as much as fact. How much of what we know is shaped by narrative tradition rather than direct evidence? As we walk through the shadowed corridors of Westminster in our imagination, we can almost hear the echoes of footsteps long gone, whispers of secret meetings, and the faint scent of gunpowder. The Gunpowder Plot, though foiled, leaves an enduring sense of unease, a reminder that conspiracies can fester quietly in the shadows of power, that the truth is often layered beneath half-truths, and that some stories, no matter how thoroughly recorded, resist full resolution. Even today, historians and enthusiasts examine the documents, maps, and trial records, seeking clarity about the motivations, participants, and ultimate orchestration of the conspiracy. Yet every answer seems to provoke new questions. Were all actors known? Was the plan genuinely conceived by desperate men, or manipulated by unseen hands? And perhaps most hauntingly, what secrets regarding the Gunpowder Plot remain hidden, quietly resting in the margins of history, waiting for those who dare to look deeper. From the shadowed halls of Westminster and the intrigue of the Gunpowder plot, we now turn to the quiet streets of Nuremberg in 19th century Germany, where a mystery emerged that would perplex scholars, physicians, and the public for decades. In May of 1828, a young man appeared seemingly from nowhere, disoriented, mute, and clad in simple clothes that had never known the world outside a small, dark room. He carried only a letter, cryptic and brief, claiming little of his origin, yet immediately raising profound questions. Who was this boy, and how had he lived in such isolation? 19-year-old Kaspar Hauser was a paradox wrapped in flesh and frailty. His appearance suggested a life devoid of sunlight and normal social interaction. Reports describe him walking with awkward, hesitant steps, speaking in short, halting phrases, and possessing almost no knowledge of common objects or the wider world. Nuremberg's citizens, both curious and wary, gathered around him, offering care, food, and education. Yet the deeper they probed, the more the mystery deepened. How could someone survive, seemingly unscathed physically, after being deprived of the most basic human experiences for so many years? Hauser's story unfolded slowly, like a manuscript partially burned by time. He claimed he had been held in a dark cell for most of his life, visited only sporadically by an unknown man who provided minimal sustenance and forbade any knowledge of the outside world. His letters, written with laborious effort, described isolation, fear, and the occasional fleeting glimpse of a caretaker, yet offered almost no detail about his true identity. Even his handwriting, inconsistent and hesitant, seemed to echo the fragmented existence he described. Could his account be entirely true, or was it a fabrication born of a disturbed mind? Public fascination grew as scholars, doctors, and aristocrats took interest. Many proposed plausible theories: that Hauser was the child of an impoverished or illegitimate family, hidden away to avoid scandal; that he had suffered severe psychological trauma that shaped his odd behaviors; or that he might have been connected to noble bloodlines, deliberately concealed for political reasons. The latter theory suggested he could have been a rightful heir to a throne, kept in isolation to prevent succession disputes. Yet despite examinations, interrogations, and extensive correspondence, no conclusive evidence ever linked him to any specific lineage. The enigma intensified as Hauser's life progressed. He learned to read, write, and play simple instruments, yet remained socially awkward and vulnerable. His sudden bursts of insight or cleverness only heightened the contrast with his otherwise bewildered demeanor. And then, in 1833, tragedy struck. Hauser was found with a deep wound in his chest, reportedly inflicted by an unknown assailant. Some claimed it was a self-inflicted accident. Others believed it a targeted murder intended to silence him permanently. The circumstances were never fully clarified, leaving a dark, lingering question about who, if anyone, had a vested interest in his death. Hauser's life, brief yet deeply enigmatic, raises profound questions about identity, human development, and the effects of isolation. Was he a genuine victim of an elaborate confinement? A pawn in political games we can no longer trace? Or was his story partially a product of imagination, a narrative shaped as much by society's fascination as by truth? Each hypothesis carries weight, yet none satisfies fully, leaving his life suspended in uncertainty. Even today, researchers study letters, portraits, and contemporary accounts, analyzing handwriting, forensic details, and psychological patterns. Some modern scholars suggest alternative explanations, from rare psychological disorders to elaborate hoaxes, while others continue to entertain the possibility of concealed aristocratic heritage. Kaspar Hauser, whether victim, heir, or enigma, remains a figure whose existence challenges our understanding of nature, nurture, and the fragile boundaries of human experience. As we imagine him wandering the cobbled streets of Nuremberg, eyes wide with both fear and curiosity, we are left with a haunting question. What truths about Kaspar Hauser's origin, confinement, and untimely death might remain forever beyond our grasp, hidden in the shadows of history, waiting for those patient enough to search? From the streets of Nuremberg and the haunting enigma of Kaspar Hauser, we turn now across the Atlantic to a different landscape of mystery, the sun-baked deserts and ancient ruins of northern Mexico, where a prominent figure of American literature and history disappeared without a trace. Ambrose Bierce, a journalist, satirist, and Civil War veteran, was known for his sharp wit, dark humor, and penetrating observations on human nature. Yet, in December of 1913, Bierce stepped into the borderlands of Chihuahua and vanished, leaving only tantalizing fragments of a story that has puzzled historians and biographers for over a century. The region he entered was as formidable as it was isolated. Vast deserts stretched for miles, dotted with rugged mountains and ghostly settlements scarred by conflict and revolution. The Mexican Revolution was underway, a chaotic period marked by shifting allegiances, roving bands of soldiers, and perilous uncertainty for travelers. Bierce's purpose, he claimed, was to witness history firsthand and to chronicle the events unfolding in the turmoil. But the desert does not forgive missteps, and those who traverse it often leave few traces. What happened to Bierce as he walked these windswept expanses? Contemporary accounts place Bierce in a village called Ojinaga, where he reportedly planned to meet a military convoy. After bidding farewell to acquaintances and penning letters that hinted at his adventurous intent, he disappeared. Some letters indicate his wry acknowledgement of danger, as if he understood the risks but sought to confront them nonetheless. What we do know is that after leaving Ojinaga, Ambrose Bierce was never heard from again. No body, no personal effects, no definitive records, only speculation, rumor, and fragments of testimony. Mainstream explanations suggest several possibilities. One theory is that Bierce fell victim to the violence of the revolution, caught in crossfire, executed by bandits, or mistakenly targeted by one of the many factions roaming the region. Another possibility is that he succumbed to the harsh environment, exposure, dehydration, or accident, alone and far from help. Yet even these plausible accounts leave questions unanswered. Unlike ordinary travelers, Bierce was a man of intelligence, experience, and self-reliance. Could someone of his skill truly vanish without leaving any sign? Alternative theories have taken root over the decades, some grounded in intrigue, others in speculation bordering on legend. A few suggest Bierce may have chosen to disappear deliberately, weary of fame, disillusioned by the world, or drawn to the idea of crafting his own final narrative. Others propose that he was captured by revolutionary forces and quietly executed, his death intentionally concealed to avoid political complications. Even whispers of espionage circulate, fueled by his wartime experience and connections. Could Bierce have been an unwilling participant in something far larger than a mere journalistic expedition? The writings he left behind provide little guidance. Bierce's prose often toyed with mortality, irony, and human folly, yet there is a chilling prescience in his stories about disappearance, sudden death, and the unknown. His signature work, The Devil's Dictionary, reflects a mind attuned to ambiguity, contradiction, and the dark humor of fate. Perhaps it is fitting, then, that the circumstances of his own vanishing mirror the themes he explored throughout his career. Life is uncertain, and some endings are never fully revealed. Even today, historians and enthusiasts revisit archives, letters, and eyewitness reports, attempting to trace Bierce's final steps. Researchers examine revolutionary records, local folklore, and even anecdotal claims of sightings far from Mexico. Each piece adds texture but rarely clarity, reinforcing the sense that Bierce's disappearance exists in the liminal space between documented history and enduring mystery. As we imagine Bierce wandering the rugged borderlands, notebook in hand, shadowed by the sun and the unknown, we are confronted by a haunting thought. Some stories resist closure, and some individuals leave behind questions that outlast their presence. What truly became of Ambrose Bierce? Did he meet an untimely death? Or did he orchestrate the ultimate vanishing, stepping into obscurity by choice? The desert keeps its secrets well, and Bierce, like Kaspar Hauser before him, reminds us that history holds corners of darkness, where answers may never reach the light. From the vast deserts of northern Mexico and the unresolved disappearance of Ambrose Bierce, we now travel northward across Europe to the grand yet shadowed palaces of 18th century Sweden. It is a land of gilded halls, frozen fjords, and candlelit corridors, where power and intrigue moved as silently as the winter wind. Here, King Gustav III, an enlightened ruler known for his charisma, reformist ambitions, and patronage of the arts, found himself at the center of a deadly conspiracy that would shake the foundations of his kingdom. Yet even centuries later, questions linger. What truly motivated his assassins, and what secrets might history still conceal? The scene is vivid. Stockholm, 1792. The Royal Opera House glimmers with candlelight, its ornate balconies crowded with nobility and dignitaries. Music swells, and laughter echoes through the chambers, but beneath this veneer of festivity, tension simmers. Gustav III, renowned for his reforms and his centralization of power, had alienated segments of the aristocracy, military officers, and political factions who resented his authority. These tensions, simmering for years, culminated in a conspiracy that would erupt on the night of a masquerade ball, a setting both public and intimate, where masks concealed identities and intentions alike. The assassination itself was audacious. Count Jacob Johann Ankarström, motivated by political grievances and perhaps personal vendettas, stepped into the crowd with a pistol, firing at the king during the height of the festivities. The bullet struck Gustav III, who remained conscious and composed long enough to comprehend the gravity of the attack. Witnesses described the surreal scene, guests dancing, oblivious at first to the unfolding tragedy, while the king confronted mortality with an eerie calm. He lingered for days, grappling with pain, infection, and uncertainty, until finally succumbing to his wounds. Yet, as we delve deeper, the layers of this historical event reveal ambiguities that continue to fascinate scholars. Was Ankarström acting alone, or was he the instrument of a larger network of conspirators? Letters and court records hint at broader discontent, whispers of additional plots, and possible encouragement from foreign powers. Some suggest that political rivals within Sweden saw in the assassination an opportunity to reshape governance, a dramatic intervention in the ongoing struggle between monarchy and nobility. Were there figures who orchestrated events behind the scenes, remaining invisible to history's official record? The investigation into Gustav III's death, conducted in the aftermath, left more questions than answers. Ankarström was swiftly tried and executed, but his confessions were carefully controlled and filtered through the judicial system, raising doubts about whether the full scope of conspiracies was ever uncovered. Did other conspirators escape justice, their identities lost to time, or were there deliberate efforts to frame the narrative as a lone act to preserve the monarchy's dignity? Even the king's own reflections in the final hours, calm, philosophical, and almost theatrical, invite speculation. Did he recognize a conspiracy far deeper than Ankarström's act, or did he choose to cloak his understanding in stoic composure? Historians have debated the incident for centuries. Some portray it as the inevitable outcome of Gustav's bold reforms, a clash between progressive monarchy and entrenched aristocratic privilege. Others suggest darker possibilities: foreign interference, secret cabals, or personal vendettas masked as political outrage. The masquerade ball itself, an emblem of cultural sophistication, also becomes a stage for paradox, a place of beauty and music that transformed into a theater of death. How much of the night's narrative has been shaped by official accounts, and how much remains obscured in the corridors of power and secrecy? Even today, the legacy of Gustav III's assassination resonates. His death altered the course of Swedish history, shifting political power and leaving a trail of unanswered questions about loyalty, ambition, and the human capacity for both artistry and violence. The royal archives, contemporary accounts, and personal diaries provide tantalizing clues, yet they rarely converge on certainty, leaving a shadow over an event that is meticulously recorded yet mysteriously incomplete. As we imagine the masked guests, the echoing music, and the king moving with quiet dignity through the chamber before the fatal shot, one question remains. What hidden motives, secret alliances, or unseen actors shaped the night that ended Gustav III's life? And perhaps more hauntingly, what truths about power, ambition, and human intrigue remain concealed, waiting for the patient observer to uncover them centuries later? From the glittering halls of Stockholm and the fatal masquerade that claimed Gustav III, we now cross the Atlantic to a bustling port city on the edge of revolution: Boston, Massachusetts, in the early 1770s. Cobblestone streets echo with the footsteps of merchants and patriots alike, the salty wind drifting off the harbor carrying whispers of dissent. It is here, amidst the fog of colonial unrest and the thrumming of maritime trade, that one of America's most iconic acts of defiance, the Boston Tea Party, unfolded. Yet, behind the drama of overturned crates and defiant patriots lies a mystery less celebrated: the identity of the unknown betrayer who informed British authorities, a shadowy figure whose actions almost certainly altered the course of history. The Boston Tea Party took place on the night of December 16, 1773, a cold and crisp winter evening that forced citizens and sailors alike to bundle against the chill. Ships from the East India Company were moored at Griffin's Wharf, their holds heavy with tea meant to reinforce British taxes that the colonists found intolerable. The Sons of Liberty, a secretive and fervent group, prepared to strike, not with guns or swords, but with an act of symbolic destruction: the dumping of hundreds of chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The event was planned meticulously, with secrecy as paramount. Every participant understood the stakes. Exposure could mean imprisonment, loss of property, or even death. Yet, despite the care taken, there were signs that the authorities seemed unusually well informed. Orders to investigate, patrol the docks, and watch for suspicious gatherings were already in motion. Some historians suggest that British officers appeared almost prescient, their timing suspiciously precise. Who could have leaked information? And more crucially, why would someone from within the ranks of Boston patriots or sympathizers risk betrayal for personal gain, fear, or ideology? The historical records, while rich in detail about the event itself, are frustratingly silent about this critical thread. Names and motivations were never recorded, and the true informant remains hidden in the shadows of time. Contemporary letters and court documents hint at the unease that pervaded Boston in the weeks preceding the Tea Party. Merchants loyal to the crown, government spies embedded in colonial society, and even some patriots with wavering convictions may have held knowledge that could expose plots. Yet none were ever definitively identified as the betrayer. Speculation has led some to consider multiple candidates: a loyalist merchant with debts and grudges, a colonial officer coerced by promises of reward, or even a neighbor whose loyalty to the revolutionary cause was ambiguous at best. Each theory paints a different picture of human motivation, ranging from fear to avarice to ideological disillusionment. The logistics of betrayal themselves invite further inquiry. For someone to alert authorities without betraying their identity would require careful timing and coded communication. Letters could be intercepted, whispered warnings conveyed through intermediaries, or messages left in inconspicuous locations. Could the betrayer have been someone embedded deeply within the revolutionary circle, observing the activities at Griffin's Wharf, weighing their options, and then acting at a moment that would leave the maximum uncertainty? The psychological dimension of such an act is fascinating. The tension between loyalty, self-preservation, and moral conviction becomes almost tangible, a silent pulse underlying the louder clamor of rebellion. There are also hints of darker, more speculative possibilities. Could the betrayer have been motivated not merely by loyalty to the crown, but by a desire to manipulate events for personal gain, to weaken factions within the Sons of Liberty, or to influence the political trajectory of Massachusetts? Some scholars suggest that intelligence networks, both formal and informal, were far more sophisticated than previously acknowledged, and that colonial authorities may have had multiple overlapping sources feeding them information. Within this network, the identity of a single key informant could be deliberately obscured, ensuring that blame would remain diffuse and the true actor forever hidden. Adding to the intrigue is the aftermath of the Tea Party. The British response, the intolerable acts, the increased militarization of Boston, and the eventual escalation to armed conflict suggests that those in power had access to precise knowledge of the colonists' intentions. This reinforces the notion that a critical leak occurred at a decisive moment. Yet, the historical record never identifies a name. Diaries, letters, and official reports are conspicuously vague, as if an invisible hand ensured that the betrayer's identity remained unrecorded. The silence is itself a clue, an enigmatic shadow that invites endless speculation. Modern historians continue to debate the possibilities, weighing circumstantial evidence, political motivations, and psychological profiles of potential informants. Could the betrayer have acted out of fear, convinced that the revolution would fail and that self-preservation was paramount? Could they have acted from greed, seeking a reward from colonial authorities or the crown? Or was the act more subtle, motivated by rivalries, jealousy, or ideological nuance, a deliberate attempt to manipulate revolutionary events from behind the scenes? Each theory remains plausible, yet frustratingly unprovable. As we imagine the icy waters of Boston Harbor reflecting the moonlight that night, the quiet rustle of coats and the hushed voices of men masked in defiance, we confront a chilling possibility: that history's most dramatic acts often have hidden currents, powered not only by courage and conviction, but also by secrecy and betrayal. The unknown informant may have disappeared without a trace, leaving no personal record, no confession, and no acknowledgement. Yet their impact on the unfolding revolution may have been profound. How different might events have been had the Sons of Liberty moved with complete security? Would the narrative of rebellion, taxation, and resistance have unfolded in the same way? Even today, this unresolved question shapes the study of the American Revolution. Scholars revisit archives, cross-examine letters, and probe obscure references in journals and newspapers, yet the betrayer remains concealed, a ghost within the historical record. The mystery endures because the very nature of betrayal is its invisibility. To act successfully, one must leave no witness, no trace, and no proof. In this sense, the Boston Tea Party's unknown informant embodies the tension between human action and historical memory, a reminder that even celebrated events may harbor dark, hidden dimensions. And so, as we reflect on that fateful night, the overturned chests, and the ripple effects across colonial America, one question persists: who silently altered the course of history by revealing the plans of the Patriots, and why? Was the betrayal an act of loyalty, fear, or ambition? Or does the answer lie forever beyond reach, concealed in shadows and lost in the fog of revolution? The enigma remains, a silent witness to the fact that even in moments of heroic defiance, the unseen hand of treachery can shape the destiny of nations. From the bustling streets and secret betrayals of colonial Boston, our journey now turns to the vast and unpredictable expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine, if you will, the endless horizon of blue, the waves rising and falling like the rhythm of a living, breathing world, and a solitary ship drifting across its surface. It is 1872, and the merchant brigantine Mary Celeste is on what should have been a routine voyage from New York to Genoa. But when the vessel is discovered adrift near the Azores, the scene that greets the crew of the Dei Gratia is not just unusual, it is profoundly unsettling. The Mary Celeste is seaworthy, her cargo intact, her sails set, and yet every single soul aboard has vanished without a trace. The ship herself is an object of quiet fascination. She drifts silently in the morning fog, her decks empty, yet orderly. Personal belongings remain in place. The captain's log tells a tale of an otherwise uneventful journey, and the lifeboat is gone. There are no signs of struggle, no indications of piracy, no hint of natural disaster that could explain the total disappearance of Captain Benjamin Briggs, his family, and the crew. How could an entire ship's company vanish from a sturdy, well-provisioned vessel in the midst of open water? The questions arise immediately, and they refuse to dissipate. Contemporary reports from the rescue crew describe a scene almost surreal in its calmness. Meals are prepared, untouched. Cabins show no evidence of haste, and the ship's instruments, charts, and navigational tools are intact. In every way, the Mary Celeste appears ready to continue her voyage, yet the human presence is absent. Was this the result of a sudden and inexplicable panic? Did some unseen force compel the crew to abandon ship? The evidence offers tantalizing hints, but no definitive answers. The ship itself seems to mock any straightforward explanation, drifting like a ghost through the open ocean. Several mainstream theories attempt to account for the disappearance. One suggestion is that a sudden leak or fear of an explosion caused the crew to evacuate prematurely in a lifeboat, never to be seen again in the vast, merciless Atlantic. Others speculate that rogue waves, storms, or violent weather events forced the abandonment of the vessel. But these explanations confront immediate challenges. No storm is recorded in that region at the time, and the lifeboat, which might have carried the crew to safety, was never recovered. Could a combination of natural and human factors, an almost inconceivable convergence of misfortune, have resulted in such a perfect vanishing? Beyond these conventional theories, more speculative possibilities emerge. Some historians suggest mutiny, though there is little evidence of dissent or conflict in the captain's log. Others wonder about piracy or abduction, yet no reports from surrounding shipping lanes indicate the capture of passengers or crew. Even phenomena that blur the line between science and folklore have been invoked. Could a sudden release of alcohol fumes from the cargo have induced temporary delirium, prompting an ill-fated escape? Could magnetic anomalies, though not fully understood in the 19th century, have affected navigation instruments, heightening a sense of disorientation and fear? Each of these hypotheses offers partial insight, but leaves critical gaps unfilled. The human element of this mystery is as compelling as the technical and natural factors. Captain Benjamin Briggs was experienced, meticulous, and deeply responsible, not a man prone to rash decisions. His family, including his wife and young daughter, was aboard, a fact that makes their disappearance all the more poignant and troubling. What could compel a father to lead his family off a safe and seaworthy ship into the uncertainty of open water? And what fears, invisible to modern eyes, might have gripped the crew? The narrative becomes not only a study of maritime mystery, but also an exploration of human psychology in extreme circumstances. The Mary Celeste itself continued to drift after her initial discovery, passing through the hands of salvage crews, investors, and maritime authorities. Yet the ship's voyages brought no new answers. Every inspection revealed the same calm, eerie order: provisions untouched, the cargo secure, the decks organized. Even decades later, investigators, writers, and curious minds have examined the case, combing through logs, weather records, and eyewitness accounts, but the Vanishing remains unexplained. Each new investigation uncovers fragments of information, but the fundamental question, why did the crew disappear, is left unresolved. In the modern imagination, the story of the Mary Celeste evokes visions of ghost ships, spectral captains, and supernatural phenomena. Tales abound of hauntings, sea spirits, and inexplicable forces. Yet the real intrigue lies in the collision between tangible evidence and the void of human presence. Unlike many historical mysteries, the Mary Celeste offers physical proof: a ship, a log, belongings, and cargo, against which the total absence of people becomes a more profound enigma. Why does the evidence point toward normalcy even as the outcome defies explanation? The tension between what we can observe and what remains hidden propels the mystery forward, generation after generation. Researchers have attempted to reconstruct the ship's final hours, examining everything from prevailing currents to alcohol fumes to the psychological dynamics of confined crews at sea. Yet each hypothesis, no matter how plausible, encounters the same obstacle: the lack of corroborating evidence. Unlike a murder scene or a vanished settlement, the ocean does not preserve records, leaving only speculation and inference. This absence itself becomes a character in the story, a silent presence that emphasizes the magnitude of the mystery. The Mary Celeste's story also invites reflection on human vulnerability and the limits of perception. In the vast, unpredictable environment of the open ocean, even the most experienced and careful sailors can encounter forces beyond comprehension. Nature, circumstance, fear, and perhaps unseen human actions intertwine, producing outcomes that challenge the bounds of reason. Is it hubris to assume that any event must have a logical explanation? Or is it humility that allows us to acknowledge that some mysteries endure despite evidence and inquiry? As we watch the ship drift across the Atlantic in our imagination, its empty decks swaying with the waves, one question lingers above all. What became of Captain Briggs, his family, and the crew? Did they succumb to misjudgment, a hidden natural hazard, or human intervention? Or does the truth lie beyond reach, carried away by the very ocean that preserved the vessel as a ghostly testament to their disappearance? The enigma of the Mary Celeste endures, a reminder that even in an age of records, logs, and meticulous documentation, the sea guards its secrets with relentless patience, leaving us to wonder what remains hidden beneath the waves. As we shift from the haunting stories of vanished ships and unexplained disappearances, our focus moves to a peculiar and eerie chapter in European history: the Dancing Plague of 1518. In the sweltering summer of that year, the streets of Strasbourg, a bustling city in the Holy Roman Empire, became an unearthly stage. Ordinary townspeople, caught in the heat of the season, began to dance uncontrollably. What began with a solitary woman soon escalated into a citywide frenzy, with dozens, then hundreds, moving with a convulsive rhythm that would not cease. Their bodies twisted and turned, unrelenting, until exhaustion, collapse, or even death intervened. Yet the aftermath of this strange epidemic, often overshadowed by the initial spectacle, reveals a darker and more enigmatic mystery. beyond the documented deaths from sheer fatigue and possible cardiovascular failure, rumors and fragmented records hint at a series of inexplicable deaths among survivors in the months that followed. Could the dancing itself have triggered a more insidious chain of events? Or was something else at work? Something that history has failed to fully explain. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city of narrow cobblestone streets and timber-framed houses, where everyday life was already marked by hardship and disease. Contemporary reports describe the afflicted as writhing in public squares, their movements described almost as if possessed, and no amount of pleading, prayer, or force could halt them. Physicians of the era, perplexed by the phenomenon, prescribed treatments ranging from bloodletting to the invocation of religious ritual, none of which seemed effective. Historical records note that those who survived the initial frenzy often exhibited lingering symptoms, tremors, delirium, and peculiar ailments that confounded even the most experienced healers. The mystery deepens when we examine the post-plague deaths recorded sporadically across parish registries and medical notes. Some scholars suggest these deaths could have been indirect consequences: malnutrition from prolonged dancing, psychological trauma manifesting physically, or even the spread of yet undocumented disease exacerbated by weakened bodies. Yet these explanations, though plausible, leave gaps. Instances where otherwise healthy adults reportedly fell gravely ill weeks or months later, their symptoms mysterious and resistant to known remedies. Speculation has persisted for centuries. Could the dancing plague have been a form of mass psychogenic illness, triggered by stress, famine, or social pressure? Scholars examining this theory point to similar phenomena in isolated communities, where collective hysteria manifests in strange physical behaviors. But even within this framework, the lingering deaths are difficult to explain. Could there have been environmental factors at play, perhaps contamination in the city's food or water supply that compounded the physical strain? Or might there have been chemical or herbal elements, lost to history, which inadvertently caused long-term toxicity? More fringe theories have emerged over the years. Some historians, drawing from scant anecdotal evidence, propose that the plague might have been linked to supernatural or spiritual forces, interpreted by contemporary observers through the lens of religion and fear. In a deeply devout society, unexplained behavior often became the canvas upon which divine wrath or demonic possession was projected. Could it be that what appeared as uncontrollable dancing was, in part, a manifestation of collective psychological turmoil interacting with unexplained environmental or spiritual factors? Accounts also mention that certain families seemed disproportionately affected, raising questions about heredity or social dynamics. Did some survivors carry hidden predispositions, physical or psychological, that made them more vulnerable to delayed consequences? Or were these deaths, in fact, the result of post-traumatic stress, a condition that, though unrecognized at the time, might have debilitated individuals in ways that would eventually prove fatal? The narrative of the dancing plague and its aftermath offers a unique window into the intersection of history, medicine, and human psychology. Contemporary witnesses describe the scene in haunting detail, bodies moving with almost mechanical precision, faces frozen in expressions of strain or ecstasy, and the relentless rhythm of feet against stone. Physicians recorded vital signs, attempted treatments, and chronicled outcomes, yet they too admitted bewilderment. How could so many be compelled to dance beyond exhaustion? How could the effects linger, silently claiming lives after the spectacle had ended? Even today, the dancing plague invites a mixture of scholarly caution and imaginative conjecture. Modern studies in neuropsychology, stress disorders, and mass hysteria have attempted to reconstruct the conditions that might have provoked such behavior, yet the historical record remains tantalizingly incomplete. The aftermath, the mysterious deaths, remains even more opaque. Did the city of Strasbourg, in its records, hint at a pattern? Or were these anomalies scattered randomly, never meant to be fully understood? As we examine this chapter of history, questions multiply. Could there be lost documents, buried beneath layers of time, that hold the key to understanding the true toll of the dancing plague? Were there political, social, or economic pressures that compounded the phenomenon, ensuring that only fragments of the truth survived? And most hauntingly, how much of what we label unexplained is a reflection not of human ignorance, but of the limits of historical preservation itself? Walking through the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg today, one can imagine the ghostly echoes of a city gripped by an unstoppable force of movement and mystery. No monument marks the precise spot where the dancers fell, nor does any plaque recount the subsequent, unexplained deaths. The story survives only in fragmented records and the lingering questions that historians, scientists, and curious minds continue to ponder. The dancing plague and its deadly aftermath remind us of the fragile boundary between the known and the unknowable. History often provides evidence without explanation, testimony without context. The deaths following the plague compel us to consider forces, psychological, physiological, environmental, or perhaps even metaphysical, that may have shaped the lives of those who lived through it in ways we are only beginning to speculate upon. Could a society's collective stress, faith, and environmental conditions combine in ways that produce effects reaching far beyond the immediate crisis? Or does the truth lie somewhere entirely outside the realm of our modern understanding? Whatever the case, the shadow of the dancing plague lingers, not only in the historical record, but in the imagination. The mystery is not confined to the spectacle itself. It extends into the months that followed, into the silent toll exacted on bodies, minds, and families. The deaths, the suffering, the unanswered questions, they invite reflection, careful study, and wonder. Even now, centuries later, one cannot help but ask, what else might remain hidden beneath the cobblestones of Strasbourg, and how many lives, quietly claimed after the frenzy, will history never fully illuminate? The story of the dancing plague and its mysterious aftermath challenges us to reconcile what is recorded with what remains elusive. It compels us to listen, carefully and patiently, to the faint echoes of a past that refuses to be neatly explained. And as we consider the unresolved deaths linked to this extraordinary event, we are reminded that history, for all its documentation, often leaves us with more questions than answers, an enduring invitation to explore, to ponder, and to wonder what mysteries, still unseen, continue to shape our understanding of the human experience. From the shadow of Strasbourg's cobblestones, where the echoes of the dancing plague linger, our journey now carries us to a far different stage of history, a place of gilded palaces, whispers of royalty, and one of the most enduring enigmas of the 20th century. The fate of Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of Russia's last imperial family. The Romanovs' world was one of splendor and ceremony, a court defined by rigid etiquette, exquisite clothing, and the elaborate rituals of monarchy. Yet beneath the grandeur, secrets festered, and the sweeping tide of revolution would soon transform opulence into tragedy. The year was 1918. A year etched into history by violence and upheaval. The Romanov family, once sovereign rulers of a vast empire, were imprisoned in Ekaterinburg, confined within the Ipatiev house, a modest and oppressive structure guarded by Bolshevik soldiers. It is here, within these walls of fear and secrecy, that Anastasia's story, and the first seeds of speculation, would be sown. Historical records confirm the execution of the Romanov family in July, yet almost immediately after, whispers emerged that one child, perhaps the lively and spirited Anastasia, might have escaped the carnage. Could such a survival have been possible? If so, why did the story take on a life of its own, inspiring decades of intrigue and investigation? Anastasia's youth, only 17 at the time of her family's execution, made her the most plausible subject of speculation. She was known for her energy, independence, and a certain defiance that belied her station. Those who later claimed to be Anastasia often referenced memories, mannerisms, and knowledge of the imperial household that seemed at first glance convincing. Among the most famous claimants was Anna Anderson, who appeared in Berlin in the 1920s. She recounted a harrowing tale of escape, hiding among sympathetic villagers, enduring suffering, and narrowly avoiding death. To supporters, her story seemed to fit the pattern of someone who had survived by sheer willpower. Yet to skeptics, inconsistencies and gaps in memory raised serious doubts. The case of Anastasia is further complicated by the sheer number of claimants over the decades. Men and women across Europe and beyond asserted identities connected to the Romanov bloodline, often producing letters, photographs, or anecdotes intended to validate their claims. Some sought fortune or notoriety. Others seemed genuinely convinced of their own heritage. The pattern is striking. Human beings drawn to mystery, hope, and the possibility of rewriting a tragic history. How much of these claims were motivated by greed, and how much by a psychological need to inhabit a story larger than oneself? Scientific inquiry, initially limited by technological constraints, eventually entered the fray. In the 1990s, mitochondrial DNA testing compared remains discovered near Ekaterinburg with living relatives of the Romanovs. Forensic science confirmed the identities of most of the family, seemingly closing the chapter. Yet even in this era of empirical evidence, certain questions linger. Could human error, contamination, or missing remains account for residual doubt? Could fragments of mystery persist simply because the human imagination refuses to let a story of royal survival die quietly? Fringe theories proliferated alongside mainstream investigation. Some suggested that political forces, either during the revolution or in its aftermath, might have assisted in the secret escape of one or more family members. Others speculated that Anastasia had been spirited away to distant nations, raised under assumed identities, or even secretly adopted into households far removed from Russia. These theories, while lacking definitive evidence, highlight the profound allure of the unknown. They ask us to consider the delicate intersection of memory, identity, and historical narrative. When documents vanish and witnesses die, what truths remain, and how do they endure in rumor, myth, and speculation? Psychological factors also play a subtle but powerful role. Survivors and claimants often displayed behaviors that could be interpreted as genuine trauma or as strategic performance. Their stories, layered with emotional resonance, challenge historians to parse authenticity from invention. Memory, particularly when shaped under extreme stress, can be both precise and unreliable. How much of Anna Anderson's recollection, or that of others, was a reconstruction influenced by wishful thinking, suggestion, or deep personal conviction? And how does one weigh the testimony of those who may have truly believed in their own identities against the forensic certainties offered by modern science? Anastasia's narrative is entwined with culture as much as with history. The very notion of a lost princess inspired novels, plays, and films, each iteration embedding the story deeper into collective imagination. Yet this cultural resonance complicates historical analysis, as myth and fact blur, making it difficult to separate emotional truth from empirical truth. The more compelling the legend, the more persistent the mystery. Could it be that Anastasia's story endures less because of unresolved forensic questions, and more because it fulfills a universal fascination with survival, escape, and the defiance of death? Even today, the question of identity resonates in subtle ways. How do we define authenticity? Is it DNA alone, or do lived experiences, memories, and personal testimony carry weight in our understanding of who a person is? The tale of the Romanov claimants challenges conventional notions of identity and evidence, demanding that we consider history not only as a series of documented events, but as a tapestry woven from perception, speculation, and the longing for resolution. In the quiet corridors of archival rooms, in faded letters preserved in European libraries, and in the oral histories passed down through generations, traces of these mysteries remain. Some letters hint at secret sympathies among soldiers. Some photographs suggest uncanny resemblance. Some journals record fleeting sightings of women who may or may not have been Anastasia. Each piece, incomplete and fragile, feeds the enduring question: could someone, somehow, have survived the execution? And if so, what became of them in the vast and turbulent world that followed the fall of the Romanovs? Ultimately, the hidden identity of Anastasia Romanov claimants is a meditation on uncertainty itself. It illustrates how history, while grounded in evidence, is always mediated by human experience, by the stories we tell, the memories we preserve, and the mysteries we cannot resolve. It reminds us that even when science offers answers, the human imagination and the shadow of doubt remain potent forces, shaping how we perceive the past and what we hope to uncover in its recesses. Walking through the palaces and streets of Petrograd, or what is today St. Petersburg, one might feel the invisible presence of history's unanswered questions. No gravestone, no plaque, no formal archive can fully convey the tension between fact and speculation, between documented history and lived possibility. And so the story of Anastasia endures, not merely as a historical inquiry, but as a symbol of the unresolved, the hidden, and the human yearning to believe that even amidst tragedy, survival is possible. For historians, investigators, and the curious observer alike, the question persists: was Anastasia truly among the executed, her story closed by modern science, or does a fragment of truth linger, hidden in the shadows of Europe, waiting for discovery? The answer remains tantalizingly out of reach, leaving us with a sense of wonder, reflection, and the haunting knowledge that some mysteries may never be fully unraveled. And as we consider the claimants, the letters, the photographs, the whispers, we are reminded that history is not solely the domain of certainties. It is also the realm of possibility, of human desire to confront death, injustice, and erasure with hope, imagination, and sometimes defiance. Anastasia's story, in all its uncertainty, continues to captivate because it speaks not only to the past, but to the eternal question of identity, survival, and the mysteries that reside at the edges of human understanding. From the shadowed streets of Petrograd and the whispered tales of survival among the Romanovs, we turn now to another thread of history's unsolved enigmas. This time, a narrative set not in the palaces of royalty, but in the corridors of power and the dimly lit avenues of Scandinavian capitals. The story begins with the life and death of Sweden's most infamous political mystery, the assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme in 1986. Yet to fully grasp the breadth of this enigma, we must step back, across decades, to the often overlooked assassinations of his historical predecessors, Sweden's political figures who met untimely, and in some cases suspicious, ends under circumstances that remain incompletely understood. Picture Stockholm in the mid-20th century, its streets slick with winter frost, gas lamps casting pools of light onto cobblestone, the hum of trams intermingling with the distant clatter of horse-drawn carts. Political tension crackled quietly beneath the surface of orderly facades. Sweden, though neutral in global conflicts, was not immune to internal strife and the murmurings of radical ideologies. Within this context, figures such as Prime Ministers Hjalmar Branting and Per Albin Hansson navigated the precarious balance between reformist ambition and public scrutiny, their lives entwined with the hopes, and sometimes the violent resentments, of a nation undergoing profound social transformation. Several political leaders met violent ends before Palm's murder would shock the world, their deaths enveloped in a cloud of suspicion, rumor, and incomplete records. One such figure was Count Erich Gustav Bostrom, who served as prime minister in the early 1900s. Though officially he died of natural causes, whispers of covert threats and political maneuvering circulated in diplomatic circles, raising questions about whether unseen hands hastened the decline of certain Swedish statesmen. How much of history has sanitized these narratives to shield the public from the unsettling reality that political power can be lethal? Could we, in retrospect, trace patterns linking these deaths to Palm's own fate decades later? Palm's assassination, occurring on a quiet Stockholm street late at night, bore hallmarks both chilling and enigmatic. A lone gunman fired without warning, leaving the Prime Minister mortally wounded. The immediate aftermath revealed a nation in shock, a law enforcement apparatus scrambling for answers, and an international audience captivated by the mystery of the crime. Yet this tragedy did not exist in isolation. When historians and investigators began to trace Sweden's political history, patterns of unresolved deaths, disappearances, and threats emerged, each case seemingly distinct, yet collectively hinting at a subtle, almost imperceptible web of danger surrounding those at the highest echelons of Swedish governance. Official investigations into Palm's murder have generated extensive documentation, forensic analysis, and a proliferation of theories. Some posit a lone attacker driven by personal grievance. Others suggest extremist political groups, acting from the shadows, orchestrated the event with meticulous planning. Yet, when viewed alongside the assassinations of earlier leaders, the spectrum of possibility widens. Could there have been a lineage of targeted killings, each seemingly isolated but connected by political undercurrents too subtle to capture in public records? Historical accounts reveal, for instance, that during the 1920s and 1930s, Sweden experienced waves of political unrest influenced by radical movements across Europe. Communists, fascists, and other ideological factions vied for influence, sometimes employing intimidation or violence. Certain political deaths, though officially attributed to illness or accident, were surrounded by circumstances that invited scrutiny. Documents found in parliamentary archives suggest a culture of clandestine monitoring, surveillance, and, at times, active suppression of perceived threats. Were these measures merely preventative, or did they conceal darker interventions? Palm's murder also invites speculation regarding the role of foreign influence. During the Cold War, Sweden's position as a neutral yet strategically significant nation drew attention from intelligence agencies across Europe. Did external actors, spies, diplomats, or covert operatives, play any role in shaping the destinies of Swedish leaders? Some historians propose that these external pressures may have indirectly influenced political trajectories, creating an environment in which assassination or intimidation became a conceivable tactic. Others suggest more conspiratorial scenarios, shadowy networks orchestrating events to destabilize governance or send silent messages to remaining leaders. The lack of definitive evidence makes these theories impossible to confirm, yet their persistence highlights the enigmatic allure of political death. The cultural and psychological dimensions of these mysteries further complicate understanding. Sweden, like many nations, cultivates a narrative of civility, stability, and order. The notion that political figures could be systematically targeted challenges these national myths. Moreover, human fascination with unsolved crimes ensures that speculation fills the gaps left by evidence. Each unexplained death, each incomplete report, becomes a node in a growing web of narrative uncertainty. How much of our engagement with these historical mysteries is informed by genuine investigation, and how much is shaped by the human desire to find meaning in chaos? Technological advancements, from forensic science to archival research, have illuminated aspects of Palm's assassination, yet his predecessors' deaths remain shrouded in historical fog. Modern investigative tools, DNA analysis, ballistic reconstruction, and advanced archival cross-referencing could theoretically be applied retroactively, but limitations in record preservation, witness availability, and political sensitivities make definitive conclusions elusive. As a result, we are left with partial truths and tantalizing fragments, letters hinting at threats, contemporaneous reports of suspicious behavior among associates, and official inquiries that acknowledge uncertainty without resolving it. Even decades later, the specter of these unsolved mysteries persists in public consciousness. Political historians continue to debate motives, timelines, and potential connections. Memoirs of diplomats and civil servants offer anecdotal insights, sometimes contradicting each other, creating a mosaic of conflicting perspectives. Oral histories, passed down through families of politicians and civil servants, carry fragments of suspicion and fear, yet these accounts cannot be verified with empirical certainty. Could these narratives, however incomplete, preserve a truth inaccessible to conventional historical methods? Perhaps most striking is the way these events illuminate the fragility of power. Political authority, often perceived as protective, can render leaders vulnerable. Even in a society renowned for transparency and stability, the combination of personal ambition, ideological fervor, and opportunistic threat can produce outcomes as lethal as any battlefield. Each unexplained death in Swedish political history, from the early 20th century to Palm's murder, serves as a somber reminder that influence carries inherent danger, and that the pursuit of historical understanding is perpetually intertwined with unresolved questions. As we consider these intertwined mysteries, a haunting question emerges. Is there an overarching pattern, a hidden thread connecting these historical deaths? Or are we imposing narrative coherence on a series of unrelated tragedies? Can the psychological impact of uncertainty itself, the human need to identify villains and motives, distort our perception of events that were, in reality, isolated? Or does the persistence of these questions indicate that some truths remain deliberately concealed, perhaps by actors long gone, or by forces whose motives defy simple categorization? The unsolved murder of Olof Palme and the enigmatic fates of his predecessors remind us that history is not a linear record of events, but a layered tapestry of fact, speculation, and human interpretation. Each fragment of information, archival notes, witness recollections, investigative reports, carries both clarity and ambiguity, challenging us to confront the limits of knowledge. In this interplay between the known and the unknown, between documentation and imagination, the past asserts its complexity, resisting the finality of conclusion. Walking through Stockholm today, the streets where Palme was assassinated bear silent testimony to the intersection of visibility and vulnerability in public life. Nearby, plaques and memorials honor those who served, yet they do not, and cannot, answer every lingering question. Even as forensic methods evolve and historical scholarship deepens, the full story of these political deaths remains just out of reach. Shadows linger where certainty cannot penetrate, inviting us to reflect on the interplay of power, risk, and human curiosity. Ultimately, the narrative of Sweden's political assassinations, Olof Palme's and those of his predecessors, is a meditation on the enduring nature of historical mystery. It is a story not only of politics and power, but of the human struggle to understand events that defy neat explanation. And it asks us to consider, in the absence of definitive answers, what does it mean to know history at all? Can the gaps, ambiguities, and uncertainties themselves convey truths about human behavior, governance, and vulnerability that no document or testimony could fully capture? From the shadowed streets of Stockholm, we now turn our attention across the Atlantic, to the dimly lit alleys and gaslit avenues of 19th century Baltimore, a city bustling with commerce, yet quietly haunted by the macabre imagination of one of America's most enigmatic literary figures. Edgar Allan Poe, a man whose name evokes images of raven-winged mystery and the haunting cadence of Gothic verse, left behind a legacy as remarkable as it is enigmatic. Yet his life, steeped in tragedy, culminated in a death as puzzling as the tales he wove, a death that continues to defy explanation, even more than a century and a half later. It is October 3rd, 1849. The autumn air in Baltimore carries a sharp chill, fog rolling in from the harbor, obscuring the cobblestone streets. On this night, Poe was discovered wandering the city in a state of delirium, dressed in clothes that were not his own. Witnesses described him as appearing disoriented, weak, and unable to account for his presence in the city, though he had lived in Baltimore for much of his life. Within days, he was dead, the official cause recorded as congestion of the brain, an ambiguous term of the era that provided little insight into the circumstances surrounding his final days. At first glance, the story seems tragic, yet simple. A brilliant, tormented man succumbs to illness and exhaustion. However, the details that survive challenge this tidy explanation. Poe had spent the months prior moving between cities, Richmond, Philadelphia, and New York. His health reportedly fragile, his finances precarious, and his relationships strained. Letters from this period hint at anxiety and confusion, yet there is no clear indication of imminent danger. How then did a man so familiar with the shadows fall victim to a fate so obscure that even contemporary physicians could not define it? The historical record is frustratingly sparse. No autopsy was conducted, a common oversight in mid-19th century America, particularly for individuals of modest means. His body was interred in a quiet Baltimore cemetery, though even the location of his remains would become contested over time. Some accounts suggest that Poe's body may have been moved multiple times, leaving an added layer of uncertainty to the story of his final resting place. How much of our understanding of Poe's death is constructed from fragments, anecdotal accounts, and second-hand testimony? And how much is the product of later embellishment, shaped by the mythos of the man who created it? Several mainstream explanations have been proposed. Some scholars point to alcohol abuse, a plausible factor given reports of Poe's struggles with drinking. Others suggest chronic illnesses, epilepsy, diabetes, or heart disease as potential contributors to his sudden collapse. Medical historians have speculated that Poe's erratic behavior before his death could indicate a delirium tremens episode, a complication of severe alcohol withdrawal. Each of these theories offers a measure of plausibility, grounded in the known conditions of Poe's life and the limitations of 19th century medicine. Yet none fully reconcile the oddities: his appearance in clothes not his own, the absence of identifiable companions, and the unexplained gaps in his movements leading up to his death. The intrigue deepens when we consider more speculative or fringe theories proposed by those who find the conventional explanations insufficient. One theory suggests foul play, that Poe, as a controversial literary figure and outspoken critic of certain political and social norms, may have been targeted. Baltimore, though not widely recognized as a hub of political assassination, was a city of secret societies, underground networks, and fierce partisan rivalries. Could Poe have encountered individuals intent on silencing him, or perhaps exploiting his vulnerable state? Historical evidence is scant, but the possibility, however remote, lingers in the shadows of narrative imagination. Another compelling, though less conventional hypothesis involves couping, a form of voter fraud common in the mid-19th century. Couping involved the kidnapping of individuals, often intoxicated or otherwise incapacitated, who would then be forced to vote multiple times under different disguises. Some scholars have speculated that Poe may have been a victim of this practice, explaining both his disheveled appearance and his presence on the streets in unfamiliar attire. If true, it paints a picture of his final hours as shaped not by personal failings alone, but by a broader social and political undercurrent, an element of chaos within a seemingly ordered urban landscape. The psychological dimensions of Poe's life further complicate attempts to understand his death. He was a man intimately acquainted with grief, loss, and the precariousness of human existence. His poetry and prose often explored themes of mortality, madness, and existential uncertainty, suggesting an awareness of life's fragility that was both profound and haunting. Could his literary sensibilities, his preoccupation with death, have shaped the very circumstances of his demise? Did his penchant for self-dramatization and the theatricality of his public persona influence the accounts that survive, blurring the line between historical fact and narrative construction? Contemporary accounts, though often inconsistent, hint at a figure at once fragile and defiant. Observers recall his piercing eyes, gaunt features, and a voice that alternated between lucidity and incoherence. Neighbors and acquaintances noted his wandering in the days prior to his death, his engagement with the world seeming intermittent, as if he existed partially in a realm of imagination and partially in the stark reality of urban life. Was this the culmination of chronic illness, an acute medical episode, or a more sinister human interference? Or did Poe himself, in some tragic irony, step into the narrative of his own legend, becoming both subject and object of the mystery that endures? Modern forensic speculation has attempted to reconstruct possibilities using the limited evidence available. Analyses of Poe's medical history, environmental conditions, and contemporaneous accounts of his death have suggested alternatives ranging from rabies to carbon monoxide poisoning. Each theory, while intellectually provocative, encounters the same barrier: the absence of definitive documentation or physical evidence. Poe's death remains a case where conjecture can flourish, but certainty cannot. Even the location of his final hours is wrapped in ambiguity. The filthy room of the hospital where he was found, as described by witnesses, offers few clues and many questions. The physicians who attended him reportedly lacked knowledge of his identity at first, calling him Mr. Poe only after inquiry. Their notes, sparse and inconsistent, leave gaps that invite speculation. Did these gaps conceal medical incompetence, social neglect, or the limits of contemporary documentation? Or do they reflect something more enigmatic, a brush with forces and circumstances beyond ordinary understanding? The enduring fascination with Poe's death is, in many ways, inseparable from the nature of his life and work. He crafted tales of the uncanny, of the boundaries between reality and the surreal, the living and the dead. His death, enigmatic and unresolved, mirrors these narratives. Scholars, enthusiasts, and casual observers alike are drawn to the mystery, perpetuating a cycle in which speculation feeds myth, and myth, in turn, colors interpretation of the sparse facts. It is a rare case in which the story of the death becomes inseparable from the literary legacy, the mystery enhancing rather than diminishing the impact of the man's work. As we consider the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe, questions naturally arise that may never find definitive answers. Was he a victim of circumstance, a fragile health system, or the machinations of others? Did the city, with its fog, politics, and hidden dangers, play a role in shaping the final chapter of his life? And how much of our modern interpretation is shaped not by evidence alone, but by the human desire to find coherence and narrative symmetry in events that resist explanation? Walking through present-day Baltimore, the streets are quiet in the early hours, fog drifting over the harbor much as it did in 1849. The buildings, both grand and dilapidated, bear silent witness to events that unfolded long ago. Where exactly Poe wandered during those final days may never be known, yet the city itself retains an aura of mystery, as if the bricks, alleys, and gas lamps hold fragments of memory that elude historical capture. Ultimately, the death of Edgar Allan Poe is more than a historical event. It is a meditation on uncertainty, mortality, and the limits of knowledge. Every fact uncovered, every theory proposed, only deepens the intrigue, highlighting the tension between what we can know and what remains forever beyond reach. Like the tales he wrote, his death occupies a liminal space, between reason and imagination, clarity and shadow, life and the enduring allure of the unknown. And so, as the fog rolls along Baltimore's streets and the echoes of Poe's footsteps fade into legend, we are left with a persistent question. In a world governed by both human intention and chance, what truths can ever truly be recovered? How much of Edgar Allan Poe's final journey remains hidden in the folds of history, waiting for a day when new insight, or perhaps nothing at all, might illuminate the mystery he left behind? From the fog-laden streets of Baltimore, where the shadow of Edgar Allan Poe's last days lingers, we now journey across the centuries and the English Channel into the heart of the Tower of London, a fortress that has borne witness to centuries of intrigue, power, and the quiet despair of those who disappeared within its walls. Rising stark against the gray sky, its stone battlements and narrow arrow-slit windows evoke both authority and menace. And here, in this formidable stronghold, one of history's most haunting mysteries has lingered for over 500 years. The disappearance of Edward V and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, better known to posterity as the Princes in the Tower. The year is 1483. England is a nation teetering on the edge of civil unrest. Edward IV, the father of the two boys, has died unexpectedly, leaving his 12-year-old son Edward as king and his younger son Richard as heir presumptive. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is named Lord Protector, ostensibly to guide the kingdom through this precarious succession. Yet, within weeks, the princes vanish from public view, confined to the Tower of London under the authority of their uncle. Despite official statements claiming their safety, rumors of foul play soon begin to circulate, and the tower itself becomes a silent witness to what many historians consider a grim enigma. At first glance, the story seems straightforward. A political power struggle in a volatile kingdom, a young king sidelined, and his sibling made to disappear in the service of ambition. Contemporary chroniclers reported whispers of murder, though documentation is scarce and often contradictory. Accounts written years after the events describe sightings of the princes, claims of escape attempts, and allegations against Richard of Gloucester, who became King Richard III. The tower, with its labyrinthine corridors, hidden chambers, and imposing walls, provides a perfect setting for both protection and concealment. How much of what occurred within those stones was recorded accurately, and how much has been obscured by time, politics, and deliberate obfuscation? Over the centuries, historians and investigators have sought to reconstruct the final days of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. Archaeological investigations, forensic analyses, and archival research have offered tantalizing clues, yet the results remain inconclusive. In 1674, workmen at the tower reportedly discovered the skeletal remains of two children beneath a staircase. These bones were interred in Westminster Abbey, believed by some to be the princes themselves, though verification would only become possible centuries later. Modern scientific examinations, including DNA testing, have been proposed, yet the degraded state of the remains, coupled with the lack of direct genetic comparison to living descendants, has left the question unresolved. Could these bones truly belong to the lost heirs, or are they relics of a different tragedy entirely? Mainstream historical interpretations offer several possible explanations. The most widely accepted posits that Richard III, in pursuit of his own claim to the throne, ordered the murder of his nephews, a theory bolstered by the fact that the boys disappeared during his ascent to kingship. Others suggest alternative suspects: Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, who played a pivotal role in Richard's accession, or even factions loyal to Henry Tudor, who would later become Henry VII. Each theory is grounded in political plausibility and the documented machinations of the period. Yet the absence of a direct account or confession renders all conclusions tentative, reliant upon circumstantial evidence and conjecture. Speculative theories also abound, some rooted in the supernatural, others in psychological or social interpretation. Could the boys have been quietly smuggled out of the tower and hidden, never to return to public life? Certain chroniclers mention figures who claim to have seen Edward alive years later, living under assumed identities in distant towns. While these accounts lack verification, they introduce the unsettling possibility that history may have overlooked a more mundane yet equally extraordinary outcome: that the princes were removed from public view, not executed, and their fates quietly erased from official record. The role of the tower itself invites reflection. Built to project strength and inspire loyalty, it also functioned as a prison and a symbol of absolute authority. Its architecture, with hidden stairways, secluded chambers, and fortified walls, could conceal movements entirely from the outside world. How might these spaces have been used to detain the princes, or to facilitate their disappearance? Could meticulous planning have allowed for their removal without a trace, or was the tower simply the stage upon which a tragedy of political necessity unfolded? Recent reinvestigations, combining historical scholarship with forensic technology, have reopened questions long thought settled. Detailed mapping of the tower's subterranean areas, examination of archival construction records, and reinterpretation of contemporary accounts have produced new insights into the likely locations where the boys were confined. However, each discovery generates new questions. The structural alterations over centuries may obscure original layouts, and translations of early documents can introduce ambiguity. Even as scientific methods advance, the interplay between fact, interpretation, and conjecture complicates the pursuit of certainty. The psychological and societal dimensions of this mystery further enrich its enduring fascination. The disappearance of children in such circumstances resonates deeply, not only because of the potential for murder, but because of the inherent vulnerability of youth in the corridors of power. The tower, with its combination of protection and imprisonment, becomes a stage for exploring the fragility of innocence amid ambition. Chroniclers of the time described public unease, whispers of moral outrage, and the simmering distrust that accompanies unexplained tragedy. How much did collective perception influence the documentation or suppression of evidence? Even literary and artistic interpretations contribute to the puzzle. From Shakespeare's dramatization in Richard III to modern historical novels, the story of the princes has been reimagined countless times. Each retelling emphasizes intrigue, treachery, and moral ambiguity, reflecting society's enduring preoccupation with unanswered questions and the ethical dimensions of power. These narratives, while not strictly historical evidence, shape how generations understand and emotionally engage with the mystery. They highlight the interplay between factual reconstruction and cultural memory, where legend and history often merge. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is the absence of closure. Unlike cases with discovered remains, confessions, or incontrovertible evidence, the princes in the tower leave only shadows, reports, whispers, fragments of correspondence, and the enduring physical presence of the tower itself. Forensic and archival reinvestigations have illuminated aspects of the story, but cannot definitively identify what became of Edward and Richard. Every plausible theory, assassination by a relative, removal by political factions, secret concealment, remains a possibility, each inviting contemplation of the delicate balance between historical fact and enduring enigma. Even today, the tower's silent walls seem to echo with questions. Walking along the riverside ramparts or peering into the dimly lit interior chambers, one is struck by the weight of centuries of human ambition, fear, and secrecy. The disappearance of the princes serves as a stark reminder of how historical events can be shaped by absence as much as presence. What is left unrecorded, undocumented, or deliberately obscured can become as compelling and as haunting as what survives in official accounts. In examining the princes in the tower, we are reminded that some historical mysteries resist resolution not through lack of effort, but through the very nature of their circumstances. Political intrigue, familial ambition, societal turbulence, and the limits of contemporary record-keeping converge to create a puzzle that has confounded scholars for generations. The reinvestigations, with their meticulous attention to detail and modern technological tools, have provided clarity in some respects, yet the fundamental question persists: what truly happened to Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury? And so, as the tower stands sentinel over London, centuries after those fateful months of 1483, the mystery endures. The stones bear silent witness to events that may never be fully understood, while historians, scientists, and curious minds continue to probe, question, and speculate. The legacy of the princes, lost heirs, symbols of vulnerability, and central figures in a narrative of political ambition, remains embedded in both the physical and cultural landscape. Their fate, unresolved, challenges our assumptions about power, accountability, and the persistence of unanswered questions through the ages. In contemplating the reinvestigations, one cannot help but wonder, how much of history is constructed from what we are permitted to see, and how much lies hidden, obscured by walls, politics, and the inexorable passage of time? Could new evidence yet emerge, illuminating the lives and the deaths of these young royals? Or will the tower continue to guard its secret, allowing only the shadows of history to speak? The princes in the tower remind us that some mysteries are timeless, sustained by a combination of human ambition, historical ambiguity, and the unrelenting human desire to know what has been lost. And as we peer into the depths of this century,